Hi guys, in this video I will be demonstrating Arnold rendering with Houdini on grid markets. Arnold is a very powerful modern rendering engine that has been used on many big budget films. One of the main advantages of using Arnold is the ability to get a very realistic image right out of the box without having to tweak a bunch of settings. I've rendered this scene using Arnold, and I'll use it to share my workflow in setting up, iterating, and debugging with Arnold and Houdini. This image consists of a few simple shaders and 3 lights. The main geometry is using a glass shader with subsurface scattering, while everything else is using a standard diffuse shader. The massive advantage of using grid markets for Arnold renders is you don't have to purchase an Arnold license. The way I work is I do test renders locally on my workstation using Houdini Indie and the free trial Arnold license. This will allow you to use Arnold, but will give you watermarked renders. When I am happy with the local test renders, I will submit the exact same HIP file that I used to render locally, and I will get back a 100% unwatermarked image. Instructions about how to install Arnold and what versions are supported can be found in the knowledge base section in the user portal. Before I explain how to set up and render with Arnold, I want to clarify a few points. Houdini lights and Mantra shaders are not compatible with Arnold. Arnold uses its own set of lights and shaders. All of the compatible lights and shaders have Arnold in the node name. If you are opening a scene that was created before you installed the Arnold plugin, you will need to add the Arnold Properties tab to your Geo objects and camera nodes. To do so, select a node and hit Tab. In the Arnold menu, select and click the Add Arnold Properties button. This will add an Arnold tab to your Geo node. This is needed in order to use attributes. Any new Geo or camera object created after you have installed Arnold will automatically have this tab. You can use Houdini attributes created in the SOP context to drive shader properties such as color, p-scale, and opacity, though the workflow is a little different than when using Mantra. To begin, in the shop context, put down an Arnold standard SOP. The Arnold standard is the all-around Uber shader that is similar to either the Mantra principled shader or the Mantra surface shader. If you dive inside and select the standard node, you can click the little gear icon in the parameter pane and select from a number of presets. These can give you a good reference point into how to tweak the settings to get a certain look. In addition to the default Arnold nodes, Grid Markets also supports third-party shader libraries, such as the AL shader library developed by Anders Langlands. In this scene, I am using both the standard Arnold shaders and those found in the AL shader library. I tend to use the standard Arnold shaders if I'm creating simple shaders. For more complex shaders, I tend to use the AL shaders, for I feel they give you much more fine-tuned control, and I prefer the layout of the parameters. They give you a very nice workflow when using subsurface scattering. They also come with some cool procedural shaders such as noises and more refined versions of the Arnold utility shaders. Let's say we want to use an object's point color to drive the final render color. To access the attributes, hit Tab and type User. This will show the SOPs that can be used to import attributes. In this case, I want to import a color attribute, so I select User Data RGB. Next, wire the output of the user data SOP into the diffuse color input on the AL shader SOP, and in the parameter pane, type the attribute for color. To assign this shader, go back to the object context and in the Material tab in your Geo node, select the shader. Alternatively, you can dive into your network and assign shaders using a Material SOP. Now let's set the render settings and submit the scene. In the AL context, put down an Arnold ROP. This is where you set your render quality settings and is similar to the Mantra ROP. This scene is composed primarily of refractive and specular surfaces. An easy way to check which passes are contributing the most to your scene is to output the different render passes as AOVs. You can set which passes you want to export by clicking on the plus button next to the AOV parameter and the Output tab in your Arnold ROP. This will not export the passes to separate image files, but will instead output the beauty render with the AOVs stored as metadata. By exporting the AOVs, you can tweak each individual element in Nuke or whatever compositing program you prefer. So for instance, if you want to change the specular intensity, you can isolate that pass and change the appearance without having to re-render the image. To view the separate passes without using a compositing program, you can use the built-in image viewer that ships with Houdini. To load your renders, go to the Render menu and in InPlay select Load Disk Files. Once you have loaded your image file, you can use the drop-down menu at the top to see the individual passes. For some passes like depth and ray count, you will need to change the pixel values to see the correct result. You can do this automatically by clicking on the Adapt to Full Pixel Range button or by pressing Shift-R. Using refractive materials can add a lot of noise to your render. You can reduce the amount of noise by increasing the overall camera anti-aliasing samples and by increasing your refraction samples. In order for glass to render properly, you need to make sure that you have enough refraction ray depth samples. The higher the ray depth, the further light rays will be able to travel through the geometry. Also, when trying to render glass, make sure that you give the model some thickness. If you don't, the index of refraction will not be calculated correctly. Here you can see how increasing the refraction ray depth samples changes the look of the render. One thing to note is that the render times between these settings doubled respectively. As with all render settings, you want to use the lowest possible values while still maintaining the image quality you desire. I ended up using 4 ray depth samples for my final image. For the quality increase from 1 to 4 samples was certainly justified. The render time increase and image difference between 4 and 8 could not be. Grid Markets gives users an incredibly fast and powerful workflow for iterating sample values to help tweak and optimize your renders. Instead of rendering one frame at a time on your workstation, you can create multiple Arnold ROPs with different ray depth samples and connect them into a single render submit ROP. This allows all the different iterations to render in parallel, saving you a lot of time. Something I like to do to stay organized is to have Arnold output a log file that will automatically download with your render. To do this, go to the Diagnostics tab and check Log to File. I then like to copy the output picture parameter and reference it in the Log to File parameter. Just be sure to add .txt at the end so it gives you a text file. Next, in the log verbosity parameter, change the output to detailed. By doing this, you will get a log file name the same as your image so that they will appear next to each other when downloaded, and it makes it super easy to associate the log file with the image in case the two files get moved to separate locations. The log file will contain all of your render settings as well as a lot of useful information, including memory usage and ray counts. In the event that version control was not set up properly, this can be a lifesaver. Once you have all your settings in order, wire the output of the Arnold ROP into the render submit ROP. The submission process is the same as if you were submitted with Mantra. Fill out the frame range and authentication tabs, then hit submit render. If you are using third-party shaders, you will need to do a few extra steps to upload those shaders and specify they're for Arnold use. To add the shaders, click on the Add Additional File button and select the folder that contains the shader libraries. Select the first file in the folder and click on Add a Root variable. It doesn't matter what you name the variable, but remember to specify the remote root type as DSO. Also note that for all third-party shaders, you need to have and upload the Linux/Ubuntu version of those shaders. If you're on a Windows or Mac machine, don't upload the ones you're using locally, they will not work. Finally, check to see if all the other settings are correct and hit save and continue. Once the Grid Markets launcher is displayed, it will display which version of H2A and Houdini are being used. It should correspond to the version you are submitting from. But if you are not using a standard supported match, for instance a daily build of Houdini, it will find the closest configuration to use. You can view your job's progress by hitting the Open Manager Portal button on the Render Submit ROP. As stated at the start of this tutorial, you don't have to purchase an Arnold license to get unwatermarked images. I submitted this job with the free trial H2A plugin, and I was able to get renders that were 100% watermark free. As long as you have render credits, you can render with Arnold from Houdini as many times as you want. Finally, I wanted to give a quick reference to Shayna Leib, the artist whose work inspired this project. You can find more of her work at her website. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to you using our service.